The smiles were there. The applause was polite. The set looked warm, colorful, and inviting. But before a single difficult question was asked, something in the air already felt different. Subscribe to The Truth Narrator, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Live television has a way of revealing what edited interviews never can. There are no retakes, no rewrites, no chance to soften a moment that suddenly becomes heavier than anyone in the room expected. And on this particular morning on The View, the conversation was meant to be routine promotion for one of the most talked about films of the year. Instead, it slowly turned into a moment where the tone shifted, the smiles faded, and a simple line of questioning exposed a visible tension between Joaquin Phoenix and Whoopi Goldberg that viewers at home could feel through their screens. This was not shouting. It was not chaos. It was something far more uncomfortable, a live, polite exchange that grew increasingly serious as the minutes passed, where words carried more weight than the producers likely intended, and where Joaquin Phoenix's guarded, thoughtful demeanor met Whoopi Goldberg's direct, seasoned approach to discussing cultural impact. The context mattered, the timing mattered, and the subject they were about to discuss mattered more than anyone anticipated. Joaquin Phoenix had just delivered a performance in Joker that critics were calling historic. The film was dominating headlines for its artistry, its darkness, and the intense public debate surrounding its themes. Discussions about mental health, violence, social neglect, and the influence of media were already swirling across news outlets before Phoenix even stepped onto the set that morning. The film had sparked conversations that went far beyond cinema. Law enforcement agencies had issued public statements. Editorials questioned whether the movie could inspire real-world harm. Commentators debated responsibility, art, and consequence. And now, Joaquin Phoenix was sitting at a table designed for daytime conversation, across from hosts known for tackling difficult social topics in real time. Whoopi Goldberg was not just a talk show host. She was an Oscar-winning actor, a veteran commentator, and someone unafraid to address cultural controversy directly. Her style was calm but pointed, experienced but unfiltered. She understood the weight of live television and the power of a well-timed question. The stage was set for what was meant to be a thoughtful interview about a film. But as viewers would soon notice, this was going to be more than promotion. Because Joaquin Phoenix is not a typical celebrity guest. He does not offer rehearsed sound bites. He does not lean into easy publicity. He is famously introspective, careful with his words, and visibly uncomfortable with media circuits. Interviews with him often feel less like performances and more like personal examinations. He listens closely. He pauses before answering. And when topics turn serious, he doesn't deflect with humor. That personality trait, combined with the subject of Joker, created a situation where every question carried potential weight. At first, everything followed the expected rhythm. Light greetings, appreciation for the performance, comments about the transformation Phoenix underwent for the role. The host smiled. The audience applauded. Phoenix nodded politely, speaking softly, choosing his words with care. But the conversation began to shift when the topic moved away from acting technique and toward the film's social impact. This is where the atmosphere changed, because this was no longer about makeup, weight loss, or character study. This was about whether art could influence real behavior, whether portraying a deeply troubled character could unintentionally send a message, whether the film's themes were being interpreted in ways that concerned many people watching from home. Whoopi Goldberg leaned slightly forward. Her tone remained calm, but her words became more deliberate. She began framing questions not as a critic, but as someone aware of the public concerns surrounding the film. She wasn't accusing. She wasn't attacking. She was asking what millions of viewers were already discussing. And Joaquin Phoenix, sitting just a few feet away, visibly registered the shift. His posture changed. His answers became slower, more thoughtful, less promotional. You could sense that this was no longer a standard interview for him. This was a conversation about responsibility, intention, and interpretation. Live, with no script, no edits, and no way to retreat into rehearsed answers. For viewers at home, this was the moment they leaned closer to their screens. Not because of drama, but because of sincerity. Because something real was happening between two people trying to navigate a complicated subject in front of a national audience. Phoenix wasn't defensive, but he was careful, extremely careful. His pauses grew longer. His eyes moved away from the hosts as he gathered his thoughts. His voice lowered. The mood of the table shifted from daytime television brightness to a more serious, almost reflective tone. Whoopi didn't interrupt. She listened. Then she asked again from another angle. Not to corner him, but to understand. And that subtle persistence is what made the moment memorable. Because this wasn't a confrontation filled with raised voices. It was a confrontation of ideas. A quiet, respectful but undeniably tense exchange between an actor trying to explain the purpose of his art and a host trying to address the real-world concerns tied to it. The studio audience, once lively, grew noticeably quieter. The co-hosts, who had been animated moments before, watched closely without interjecting. And for a brief stretch of time, the view felt less like a talk show and more like a live cultural forum unfolding in real time. This is the power of live television. The unpredictability. The honesty. The way a conversation can slowly become something deeper than anyone planned. Because in that moment, Joaquin Phoenix wasn't promoting a movie. He was being asked to reflect on how that movie was being received by the world. And Whoopi Goldberg wasn't hosting a segment. She was representing the questions many viewers were already asking at home. What made this exchange stand out wasn't conflict. It was the weight of the subject matter, carried by two people who understood its seriousness. And as the discussion continued, it became clear that this interview would be remembered not for excitement, but for its uncomfortable sincerity. Because sometimes the most powerful live TV moments aren't loud. They're quiet, measured, and impossible to edit. As the conversation edged closer to its most delicate point, viewers could sense that Joaquin Phoenix was about to say something that would define how he approached the entire controversy surrounding Joker. And the room waited. By the time Joaquin Phoenix took his seat at the table on The View, the conversation surrounding Joker had already moved far beyond film criticism. It had become a cultural discussion unfolding across newsrooms, social media, and opinion panels. Headlines weren't only praising his performance. They were asking uneasy questions about the film's tone, its message, and the way audiences might interpret it. This was the atmosphere Phoenix walked into. Weeks before the interview, public debate had intensified. Commentators discussed whether the film humanized a violent character in a way that felt uncomfortable. Mental health professionals weighed in on how Arthur Fleck's isolation and suffering were portrayed. Some viewers saw the film as a tragic social commentary. Others worried about how certain audiences might relate to it too closely. It wasn't a simple promotional cycle. It was a national conversation. Law enforcement agencies had even issued precautionary statements before the film's release, acknowledging concerns that had surfaced online. News anchors referenced past incidents unrelated to the movie, but connected through cultural memory. The discussion wasn't accusing the film of wrongdoing, but it was placing it inside a sensitive historical context. Joaquin Phoenix, known for being deeply private and thoughtful, had already addressed some of these questions in earlier interviews. He often responded carefully, emphasizing that the film was meant to explore neglect, loneliness, and societal failure rather than glorify violence. But each time the question came up, his answers revealed something important. He took the concern seriously. He didn't dismiss it. He didn't joke about it. He treated it as a legitimate topic that deserved reflection. That pattern mattered when he arrived on The View, because this show had a history of discussing cultural impact openly. It was not a platform that avoided uncomfortable topics. The hosts frequently tackled social issues, politics, media influence, and public responsibility. This wasn't a late-night comedy couch. It was a daytime panel known for direct conversation. And Whoopi Goldberg, in particular, had spent decades speaking about how art intersects with society. She understood the weight of storytelling. She had lived through eras where movies and television were blamed for cultural shifts, for better or worse. Her perspective wasn't theoretical. It was informed by experience. The producers likely intended a balanced discussion, acknowledging the praise, mentioning the debate, and allowing Phoenix to share his perspective. But what they could not script was how the natural rhythm of the conversation would evolve once those topics were spoken aloud in real time. Because Joaquin Phoenix does not treat interviews as performances. He treats them as conversations that require honesty. Before stepping onto the set, he already knew these questions would come. He had likely prepared himself mentally, not with rehearsed lines, but with clarity about how he felt regarding the film's reception. He understood that avoiding the topic would only make it louder. Addressing it thoughtfully was the only option. At the same time, Whoopi Goldberg knew the audience at home was already thinking about these concerns. Ignoring them would have felt incomplete. A light promotional chat would have seemed disconnected from the public dialogue happening outside the studio. So both of them entered the interview with awareness. Awareness of the controversy. Awareness of the sensitivity. Awareness that this would not be a typical entertainment segment. What made the situation delicate was that neither side wanted conflict. Phoenix wanted to speak sincerely. Whoopi wanted to ask sincerely. But sincerity, when paired with a heavy topic, often leads to moments of tension, not because of disagreement, but because of the seriousness involved. As the early part of the interview unfolded, viewers could see Phoenix easing into the conversation. He spoke about the physical transformation for the role. He described the emotional challenge of portraying someone so isolated. He credited the director and the cast. These were familiar, comfortable subjects. But beneath the surface, there was an understanding that the discussion would eventually turn. The co-hosts smiled and nodded, but their expressions hinted that a larger question was coming. The audience clapped at appropriate moments, but the energy wasn't as light as in other celebrity interviews. There was anticipation in the room, subtle but noticeable. Phoenix's body language told its own story. He sat slightly forward, hands often resting together, listening intently to every word spoken by the hosts. He didn't interrupt. He waited. He absorbed the tone of the conversation before responding. His eyes occasionally lowered as if organizing his thoughts before speaking. He wasn't there to entertain. He was there to explain. And Whoopi Goldberg recognized that. Her experience as both an actor and a commentator gave her a unique position in the conversation. She wasn't simply asking about the film. She was trying to bridge the gap between artistic intent and public reaction. She understood how easily media narratives can spiral, and she wanted clarity, not confrontation. But clarity requires asking difficult questions. And difficult questions, when asked on live television, carry weight that edited interviews do not. There is no safety net in live broadcasting. No ability to soften phrasing after the fact. No opportunity to remove awkward pauses. Everything unfolds as it happens, with millions watching in real time. That reality was slowly building toward the moment viewers would later remember. Because as the conversation approached the topic everyone knew was coming, the pacing of the interview naturally slowed. The energy shifted from friendly to thoughtful. The pauses between questions grew slightly longer. The smiles became more restrained. It felt less like promotion and more like preparation. Preparation for a conversation about responsibility, about interpretation, about whether storytellers have a role in how their stories are received. Phoenix had addressed similar themes before, but never in this exact environment, seated across from a panel known for direct, unscripted discussion. The format itself changed the dynamic. Multiple perspectives, multiple voices, and a host willing to ask what others might avoid. The studio lights remained bright. The set remained colorful, but the emotional tone had subtly deepened. Viewers at home could sense it without knowing why, because something important was about to be said. Not in anger, not in argument, but in quiet seriousness. And as Whoopi Goldberg began steering the conversation toward the broader cultural reaction to Joker, Joaquin Phoenix leaned in slightly, ready to respond. Not as a celebrity promoting a film, but as an artist asked to explain how his work had entered a national debate. The question had not yet been asked, but everyone in the room knew it was coming. The turn in the conversation did not arrive with a sharp tone or a dramatic pause. It came gently, almost respectfully, as Whoopi Goldberg shifted her posture and guided the discussion toward the topic that had been hovering over the interview from the very beginning. Her voice remained calm, measured, professional. She acknowledged the praise for the performance. She recognized the artistic achievement. And then, carefully, she brought up the concerns many people had been discussing since the film's release. Not as accusations, not as criticism, but as questions that had become part of the public dialogue. She spoke about the way some viewers were interpreting the film. She mentioned the discussions about whether the portrayal of Arthur Fleck might resonate in unsettling ways. She referenced the broader conversation happening outside the studio, how media outlets, commentators, and even authorities had expressed unease before the movie premiered. Then she turned to Joaquin Phoenix and asked, in a composed, direct way, how he felt about those concerns. The room grew noticeably quieter. There was no background noise from the audience. No shifting in seats. The co-hosts didn't jump in. Everyone at the table looked toward Phoenix. And he didn't answer immediately. He blinked once, looked down briefly. then back up at Whoopi. His lips pressed together slightly, as if organizing his thoughts before speaking. It wasn't discomfort with the question. It was the weight of it, because this wasn't about acting technique anymore. This was about how his work was being received in the real world. He began slowly, his voice softer than before. He said that he believed the film was meant to start conversations about neglect, about mental health, about people who fall through the cracks of society. He explained that the intention was not to glorify violence, but to explore the conditions that can lead to despair when someone feels invisible for too long. His words were careful, thoughtful. He wasn't rushing. Whoopi listened without interruption, nodding slightly. But when he finished, she followed up. She asked whether he felt any responsibility for how audiences might interpret the character. Whether actors and filmmakers think about how stories are received once they leave the screen. It wasn't confrontational. It was persistent in a quiet, respectful way. And again, Phoenix paused. This pause was longer. His eyes moved away from the table for a moment, as if searching for the right phrasing. He inhaled, then exhaled slowly before responding. He spoke about how art is open to interpretation, how stories often reflect uncomfortable realities, and how he believed audiences are capable of understanding the difference between depiction and endorsement. But there was something in his expression that viewers could see, a seriousness that suggested he was weighing every word carefully, aware that this answer would travel far beyond the studio. The silence between questions became part of the moment. Live television rarely lingers in quiet spaces. But here, the pauses were not edited out. They stayed, and those pauses told their own story. Whoopi leaned slightly forward again. She acknowledged his perspective, then asked one more question from another angle. She referenced how emotionally powerful the film was, and whether he worried that some people might connect with Arthur Fleck in ways that were troubling rather than reflective. This time, Phoenix did not look away. He held her gaze, and for a brief second, there was no sound in the room at all. He responded by saying that he hoped the film encouraged empathy for people who struggle, not sympathy for harmful actions. He emphasized that the story was tragic, not celebratory, that it was meant to make audiences uncomfortable enough to think, not comfortable enough to imitate. His voice remained steady, but his tone had deepened. This was no longer an interview answer. It felt like a personal statement. The co-hosts remained quiet. The audience remained silent. Even the energy of the set seemed to slow down. What made this moment powerful was not disagreement. It was the seriousness of two people discussing a difficult topic without raising their voices. Whoopi wasn't challenging him. She was asking what viewers at home were already asking. And Phoenix wasn't defending himself. He was trying to articulate how he saw the purpose of his work. But the tension was undeniable, because the subject matter left no room for lightness. At one point, Phoenix paused mid-sentence, searching for words. That brief hesitation, broadcast live, made the moment feel raw. Unsanitized. Real. He wasn't delivering a rehearsed explanation. He was thinking in real time, aware of the sensitivity, aware of the responsibility of speaking carefully. And Whoopi gave him the space to do that. She didn't interrupt. She didn't fill the silence. She let it exist. That silence became the loudest part of the exchange. For viewers, this was the point where the interview stopped feeling like a television segment and started feeling like a live conversation about culture, art, and consequence. No music. No editing. Just two people navigating a serious discussion in front of millions. Phoenix eventually concluded his thoughts by reiterating that the film was meant to highlight suffering, not inspire harm. That he trusted audiences to understand nuance. That difficult stories sometimes need to be told, even if they make people uneasy. Whoopi nodded, acknowledging his answer. But the atmosphere had changed completely. The earlier smiles were gone. The energy of the set had shifted into something quieter, heavier, more reflective. The conversation had reached a depth that daytime television rarely holds for long. And as the segment moved toward its closing moments, there was a lingering feeling in the studio that something important had just happened. Not dramatic, not explosive, but meaningful. Because in that exchange, viewers had watched an actor confront the real-world interpretation of his work in real time, without preparation, without edits, and without easy answers. If you felt the weight of that moment, you're not alone. Subscribe to The Truth Narrator, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments as we continue unpacking what happened next. As the exchange settled into silence, the atmosphere inside the studio felt noticeably different from just minutes earlier. The bright set, designed for lively conversation and daytime warmth, now held a quiet seriousness that lingered in the air. Joaquin Phoenix leaned back slightly in his chair after finishing his last response. His hands rested together, fingers loosely interlocked, as if he had just completed something mentally demanding. His expression wasn't defensive or upset. It was thoughtful, almost reflective, like someone who had been asked to explain something deeply personal in front of a national audience. Whoopi Goldberg maintained her composed posture. She gave a small nod, acknowledging the weight of what had been said. There was no attempt to quickly lighten the mood with humor. No pivot into a playful topic. She understood that rushing past the moment would feel unnatural. For a few seconds, the panel sat in shared stillness. The co-hosts, who had been energetic earlier in the segment, seemed to recognize that this was not a point for interruption. Their faces reflected attentiveness rather than performance. The audience, too, remained unusually quiet, as if unsure whether applause would feel appropriate after such a serious exchange. Live television often moves quickly, but here, the pacing slowed to match the tone of the conversation that had just taken place. One of the co-hosts gently transitioned the discussion back toward the craft of acting, asking Phoenix about how he emotionally prepared for the role. It was a careful attempt to rebalance the energy without dismissing what had just happened. Phoenix answered politely, but his tone remained subdued. The intensity of the previous discussion hadn't fully left his expression. Viewers at home could see it. The conversation had changed him, even if only slightly. He was still present, still engaged, but more inward now. More reserved. Whoopi added a brief comment, acknowledging the importance of telling difficult stories while also recognizing the responsibility that comes with them. It wasn't a correction or a counterpoint. It felt like a closing reflection on the exchange they had just shared. The audience finally offered light applause, but it sounded different from earlier. Softer, more respectful than enthusiastic. What made this moment stand out was how naturally everyone in the room adjusted to the seriousness without being instructed to. There was no producer stepping in. No abrupt cut to commercial. The tone of the studio simply followed the emotional direction of the conversation. Phoenix's body language told its own story. He nodded often, listening more than speaking. His shoulders relaxed slightly, but his eyes still carried the thoughtful focus that had defined the earlier discussion. It was clear that he had taken the questions seriously and that he understood why they had been asked. As the segment approached its conclusion, Whoopi thanked him for being willing to engage in the conversation openly. Her tone conveyed appreciation, not for promotion but for honesty. Phoenix responded quietly, expressing gratitude for the opportunity to talk about the film in a meaningful way. The closing moments of the interview returned to familiar territory: release dates, final remarks, and polite smiles. But the energy never fully returned to its earlier brightness. Something had shifted permanently during those few minutes. The audience applauded again as the segment wrapped. Phoenix stood, shook hands with the hosts, and offered a small, respectful smile. But even as he walked off the set, there was a visible seriousness in his expression, as though he was still processing the conversation. For viewers watching live, this wasn't a dramatic television event. There were no raised voices, no heated arguments, no shocking statements. Yet many people later recalled the moment because of how real it felt. They had watched an actor respond, in real time, to the cultural weight surrounding his work. They had seen a host ask questions that many were already thinking. And they had witnessed a conversation unfold with patience, respect, and visible tension that didn't rely on conflict to be powerful. Backstage, the transition to the next segment felt almost abrupt by comparison. The show's rhythm resumed, but the earlier exchange remained fresh in the minds of those who had just watched it. Because what happened in those minutes wasn't scripted drama. It was a live demonstration of how art, media, and public concern can meet in a single conversation. And for Joaquin Phoenix, it was a moment where promoting a film turned into something far more introspective. The set lights stayed bright. The show moved on. But the emotional tone of that interview lingered well beyond its runtime. The impact of that conversation on the view did not fade when the cameras stopped rolling. In the days that followed, clips of the exchange circulated widely, discussed across social media, entertainment outlets, and cultural commentary. Unlike sensationalized celebrity conflicts, this moment stood out for its quiet intensity, its emotional honesty, and the gravity with which both Joaquin Phoenix and Whoopi Goldberg approached the subject. Media analysts pointed to it as a rare example of live television demonstrating the depth possible in daytime programming. Commentators highlighted how Phoenix's careful, measured responses contrasted with the expectation that celebrity interviews are often rehearsed, superficial, or defensive. His willingness to discuss the real-world implications of Joker on a national platform added a layer of authenticity that viewers rarely see. For Phoenix himself, the moment reinforced his public image as an actor who values reflection and responsibility. Interviews before and after this appearance continued to echo the same thoughtful tone he displayed on The View. It showed that he could navigate controversy without being confrontational, without sensationalism, and without evading difficult questions. Audiences began to perceive him not just as a performer, but as a conscientious voice capable of articulating the nuances of storytelling in a complex society. Whoopi Goldberg's role in this exchange was equally significant. Her calm, precise questioning demonstrated how a host can address sensitive topics responsibly, without turning a conversation into a public spectacle. She maintained control of the discussion while allowing space for the guest to reflect, a skill cultivated over decades of experience on live television. Critics praised her approach, noting that it elevated the dialogue beyond typical celebrity promotion and into thoughtful cultural discussion. In the broader context, this moment also sparked conversations about the responsibilities of media and storytelling. It reminded audiences that films, especially those dealing with mental health, violence, or social neglect, do not exist in a vacuum. Questions about interpretation, impact, and public perception are inevitable. And when those questions are asked on live television, they can illuminate not only the work itself, but the intent and thought process behind it. Cultural commentators observe that moments like these are why live interviews remain powerful. Edited interviews and scripted appearances often omit hesitation, nuance, and emotional honesty. But in live broadcast, every pause, every carefully chosen word, every slight shift in posture is visible. Audiences can feel the tension, the thoughtfulness, the responsibility in real time. And in this case, that raw authenticity left a lasting impression. Even years later, discussions about Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal of Arthur Fleck in Joker often reference this particular appearance on The View. Scholars of media and culture have cited it in analyses of celebrity interviews that transcend simple promotion to touch on broader societal issues. It's remembered not for drama or sensationalism, but for its subtle, almost meditative confrontation with cultural responsibility. The public reaction reinforced that viewers crave these kinds of conversations. Clips from the interview were shared not as viral entertainment, but as examples of how celebrities and media figures can engage seriously with complex topics. Social media users debated Phoenix's interpretation of the character, Goldberg's questions, and the larger cultural implications of the film, all inspired by a few minutes of live television that demanded careful listening. In essence, this exchange demonstrated the power of professionalism, thoughtfulness, and respect in live media. It proved that a celebrity appearance could be more than a promotional tool. It could be a moment of reflection and discussion about the role of art in society. It showed that even in an environment often dominated by speed, spectacle, and viral content, substance still resonates. For Joaquin Phoenix, the appearance solidified his reputation as a conscientious, deliberate performer. For Whoopi Goldberg, it reaffirmed her status as a host capable of balancing curiosity, challenge, and empathy. And for viewers, it became a touchstone, a moment when daytime television achieved something closer to the seriousness of a documentary, unfolding live, in real time. Moments like these continue to matter because they remind us why live television remains uniquely compelling. It captures spontaneity, authenticity, and the subtle complexities of human interaction in a way that pre-recorded or heavily edited content cannot. The quiet tension, the measured responses, and the thoughtfulness of both participants created an unforgettable exchange that remains relevant in discussions about media, culture, and responsibility. Subscribe to The Truth Narrator, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Watch carefully, because moments like these are rare, and understanding them reminds us that the most powerful confrontations are often not loud. They are deliberate, measured, and real.